Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Ghoul Friend Hour. Today, I have a full house. We have our first official episode with our brand new co-host, Taylor Jones. And then
Hi.
our fabulous guest, we have Mr. Mark Nesbitt from Gettysburg. Mark, I'm not even going to give you kind of an intro because I want you to dive right into the beauty that you are just the magic you're creating in Gettysburg, I should have said. So passing it on to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Morgan, for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah, Gettysburg. That's kind of my forte. I lived there for a long time, and I was a park ranger there in the 1970s, and that's where this all kind of started, because I was uh, yeah, I'd been to Gettysburg before as a tourist. Then all of a sudden, here I am as a park ranger, kind of a position of authority, and meeting all these older rangers and people from the town. And of course, I've always really wondered, are there ghosts at Gettysburg? Like everybody does, everybody did. And so I started asking around, and I got some really, really good stories from some of the older park rangers and historians that were there. I remember also one of my first bosses, Ron Wilson, who later became chief historian at Appomattox Courthouse. I asked him, I said, Ron, do you know any good ghost stories here? And of course, he was a pretty strict historian. He kind of smiled at me. He says, Mark, there are enough real stories here about this battle that will scare the pants off you. You don't need any ghost stories. And to some extent, he was right, because there's some awful things that happened at Gettysburg, and some incredibly brave young men who suffered through it. But I I still thought that there was some kind of a need to collect these stories. So, and it was a while before I collected enough to do my first book. I was even out of the Park Service by then. And but in 1991, Ghosts of Gettysburg, the very first one, came out. And the first two or three uh, books that I've written, they're actually an historian collecting folklore, which is a part of history too. So it's not really a paranormalist. I wasn't really a paranormalist there. I was just trying to document these things. And then I went out on my first paranormal investigation, and that changed things a little bit. Plus, I was approached to start ghost stories or ghost tours in Gettysburg based on the books by the chief historian at the borough of
Oh, wow.
Gettysburg. So we started that, and I ended up eventually then buying that building that you're familiar with, that you walk by, which turned out to be haunted as well.
Oh, really?
So yeah, we have a ton of stories about that place. And so now all of a sudden I'm not knee deep in it. I'm like chest deep in the paranormal. And that's when it really kind of, I got hooked on the paranormal aspects of it, and realized that when I was a ranger there, it seems like all we cared about was the soldiers while they're alive. And then once they were dead and buried, their story's over. And I realized that's not true, because when you start to get into it, you start getting EVP, and you start getting information from mediums that you trust, and other people, and also when you start getting stories that repeat themselves over the years. For example, in my most recent book, Goes to Gettysburg 8, I had to put in a chapter, deja vu, because I was getting stories, the same stories from the same venue from different people. In other words, things were happening again and again and again 15 years later after I wrote the original stories. So now we're getting into something that's really almost scientific. You can't really reproduce in a laboratory the events that ghosts uh, precipitate, okay,
Mhm.
or manifest. But because they do it themselves, and which is kind of interesting. Anyhow, you got another entity that's actually operating in the same dimension that we are, that is not controlled by living human beings. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But now you have a situation where the same things are happening over and over and over again to different people. So that's, to me, is as close to scientific replication as you can get. They're doing it. I'm just recording it.
Yeah.
So that's how this all started, I guess, with my involvement with the paranormal at Gettysburg.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I think that's pretty neat. I mean, what do you think, Taylor?
I'm all for it. I think it's all really cool and interesting, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to learn more.
Yeah. So it's actually funny because we brought Taylor. That was your first time, right?
That was the
To
only
the
time I've
Gettys-
ever gone.
Yeah, so we brought Taylor for her first time along with so Taylor is my cousin actually, and then our other cousin we brought her along with us as well because it's just such a fabulous spot, and we took him to some spooky spots, the Haunted Object Museum, and I think we were going to swing by you, and then I don't know if it was closed or something was going on, but I was telling them just a couple of stories of just some things that we had learned from our time in Gettysburg about like the orphanage, about some of the spottings in the battlefield. So I guess kind of where I want to like segue into is you did touch upon the house that you had purchased, that it turned out to be haunted. So what kind of experiences did you have there?
Let's see, I bought the house in 1997. So we've been there for quite a while. And when when I first bought it, it probably three-quarters of it is Civil War era, or before. The front part of it is 1888, so that's post Civil War. But when I invited one of my friends in, Carol Kirkpatrick, who is a pretty well-known psychic. She had been on the Maury Povich show and TV and things like that. And she came in and she started telling me things. And one of the things that she said is, I see a woman named Mary in this house. And then she was talking about children that are running around. And she said, you're going to hear kids playing with marbles or running up and down or something. And I said, well, Carol, I just got these nice new carpets in here. I don't think I'm going to hear marbles rolling. She is, yes, you will. Yeah, they're gonna roll on the other floors, from the other side. So, of course, this became one of the chapters in one of my books. So um, I wrote that all up, and it was interesting because when I go back after having all the experiences in the house, and I realized she was pretty spot on with some of the stuff. For example, the woman who owned the house longer than anyone was a woman by the name of Mary Kitzmiller. So there's one
Oh,
Mary. Yeah. And she owned the house from 1866, right after the battle, right after the war, to until I think she died in the house in 1920, or the family got rid of it in 1924. So
okay.
that's Mary Kitzmiller. I find out later on that during the battle, the man who owned the house was a fellow by the name of Andrew Woods,
Okay.
and he was a carriage trimmer, but he wasn't living in the house. He was renting it out to a family, and there was the mother of the family was Mary Young, and her
Hmm.
daughter was named Mary.
Oh man, so you got to figure out which one of the three it is, right?
Exactly.
Crazy.
But we do have Mary. The name Mary is associated with that house pretty deeply, and the uh, uh, the history of the house is kind of neat because the house the women, the Mary Young women and their families were told to hide in the basement by some officers that rode into town the morning of the battle when it started, July 1st, 1863. And so they tried to hide in the basement, but it got too hot. It's July. Even the basements got hot. So they came out, but as they were coming out, the Union Army was being defeated on that first day. And they were retreating through the town of Gettysburg, and Confederate soldiers took it over. And they took over our house. And so I'm pretty sure the way it usually worked, the soldiers that were tired or wounded were down on the first floor, and the sharpshooters were up on the second floor trying to pick off Union soldiers from on Cemetery Hill. So we have contacted some of those Confederate soldiers via EVP and through some of our mediums. And I found out through history, through the maps, that they were mostly Georgia soldiers and soldiers from Louisiana in that part of town. So we can identify that much about them. So, but the interesting thing, and the way we know that there were Confederate soldiers in the house, is because as the Union soldiers were coming through, one of them was wounded in the hand, and he apparently stopped at the house. And the two women, Mary Young, it gets confusing because they're both Mary Young, and they took care of him. And then all of a sudden, apparently, the Confederates are running into town, and they hide him in the house. They hide him up in the attic. So now we have a Union soldier hidden up in the attic, and they said in an interview many years later that they had to get him out of there because the place was full of Confederate soldiers. So they distracted the Confederate soldier somehow, and the Union soldier came down from the attic, went out of the house, and went next door and hid in that house. Then,
Dude, my like upper lip would be sweating. I don't know what I would do.
that would be by the skin of his teeth is how he got out of here. But at any rate, that's how we have that information that Confederate soldiers were in the house. So it's pretty interesting. And then of course we have the child ghosts. What about the child ghosts? Well, a worker that I had in there that was working the desk one night. The next day, she told me about something that happened to her the night before. She said, "I was, there wasn't anybody in here, and I was kind of just fading in and out of knowing what's going on, kind of daydreaming. All of a sudden, I saw a little boy materialize in the stairwell." And I said, "Well, what did he look like?" And she said, "Well, he's maybe 4 or 5 years old. He had dirty blonde hair, white shirt. He had suspenders on his pants, and he was just standing there. And he only stood there for a little while, and then he disappeared." Fast forward now to the 2014, 15. A friend of mine had a paranormal group that wanted to come in and, investigate all night long in a place. And I said, "You're welcome to. Go right. Here's the key. I'm going to bed. I don't do this anymore. So go right ahead. Knock yourself out." So they would set up in the back, and lo and behold, they hear little kids playing in the front. So they move their equipment into the front of the building, and they hear kids in the back. Typical kids, right? So he got smart. He set up his camera in the middle room and took a bunch of pictures, 50 pictures or so, back into the second room, the gray room. And he called me up the next day. He says, "I got a bunch of pictures back there, and I got one that you'd be interested in." And he sent me a picture, and it's a little boy, and he's got, you can see that he's got kind of blondish hair, white shirt, suspenders, same description that my worker gave.
Scary.
So, and people who stayed in the house have heard like a ball bouncing downstairs, children running up and down the stairs. My current manager and her husband were staying in the house, and she woke up in the middle of the night and she was really literally going eyeball to eyeball with this little boy. And she described him the same way. So he was visiting her. She said, "You can't stay here." And he kind of disappeared. So, we have, I mean, but he's back. He's still there. So is Mrs.
He's like, oh, I'm gone, but not for
All
long.
right.
That's right. This is my
That's so
territory. I guess he figured because he grew up there. So, but back in those days, in the in Gettysburg in the early 20th century, people died in their homes. You lived and you died and you had your funeral in your home. And all the Kitzmillers now are buried no more than 500-600 yards from where they lived all that time, up in the Evergreen Cemetery, the Citizen Cemetery up on Cemetery Hill. So there's a reason why the many of the places in Gettysburg are haunted, and it's because of that particular aspect of the 18th century or 19th century that you basically lived and died in your house, sometimes the house you were born in. But also, of course, in Gettysburg, you have the other phenomenon of all the death that occurred in the houses, and because many of them became hospitals right after the battle. So
another thing I kind of wanted to touch upon, because there really were so many hot spots. I know there's like the Gettysburg Hotel, the original hotel was a field hospital at one point. Spangler Farm.
Andrew Spangle, yeah, right.
Yep, that was another one, right?
Well, yeah, just virtually every farm in the entire area became a hospital, and their barns. There were the figures vary, but we always used to say 51,000 casualties dropped down on a town of about 2,400. Small town. Virtually every public building became a hospital, and every barn then became a recovery room, which was both of those had horrible stories about them because you had amputations going on one right after another, piles of arms and hands and legs and feet piling up to the windowsills in these because they just throw the limb out after they finish amputating. Then they take you out to the barn because there was some nice soft straw that was out there. Of course, they had to chase the animals out who had just finished urinating and defecating on that very same straw that they're going to put you down on to sleep on for the next few days. So they were not sanitary conditions at all. So the living hell was just beginning with being wounded, and trying to recover. So yes, the answer to your question is the Spangler Farm. In fact, I did one of the first places I went to when I was younger. I went out there and I was asking. I introduced myself to the people and I said, "Was this where General Armistead died?" And they're all kind of silent. They had just come in from plowing the fields and stuff. And the mom, who was sitting on the front porch, spoke up. She said, "Well, I don't know if any general died out here, and I really don't want to know. But the family that lived here before told a story about how one night they were looking out. They heard a noise outside, and so they looked out the second floor bedroom window, and they saw someone dressed in white walking from the barn out to where the old well used to be, not where the modern, where the well." and then turning around and walking back towards the barn. And I said, well, that could have been you know, a residual view of what happened during the battle. You know, a surgeon in a white duster, long coat, going out to get water and bringing you back in or an orderly. Kayla Miner, who is our manager now, is sensitive, and she went out there to visit the place, not really knowing that much about it, not knowing anything about that story. And she said she came back and she told me she saw somebody walking around out there in a white coat. So once again, we have a situation where these stories keep repeating themselves over and over. So who knows how many times that orderly has had to go out to that phantom well and get water for the other ghosts out there. Who knows? But yes, that's another place that's haunted as well.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of just kind of from what I'm learning and just from my times in Gettysburg, you know, there's a theory that when somebody has a very horrendous and sudden death, that sometimes it can almost freeze a spirit in time, so that, you know, for instance, if somebody is hit with a cannonball or a musket and they're killed on the spot, it's almost like it happens so fast that they don't even know that they're dead, and they kind of just keep repeating. The word is going to escape me, but it's a phenomenon and it has a specific name for it, and I can't think of what it's called.
Yeah, residual haunting. That's what I call it at any rate. And it's like
Yeah,
a
they call
video
it
playing.
like a loop. I can't think of
Yeah.
it's something loop.
Right.
But it's basically they get caught in this like loophole of they don't know that they're dead, so they just keep repeating, right before they died, whatever they were doing, they just
Mhm.
continue to do that. And so, in a way, it's like it's very cool to experience a phenomenon, but like I feel like there is like a certain aspect of kind of I feel bad and I almost feel sad that they're just continuously stuck in this carousel of the same thing,
Right.
over and over.
Well, we have a ghost in our building uh, by the name of Hank. That's what he goes by. His real name
Hank.
apparently is
I like
Edgar,
that.
but he likes to be called Hank. Now, I first found out about him from my stepdaughter Katie, who was working one night, and she came. She had just locked up, and she came over to the carriage house where we live in the back, where we stay when we're in Gettysburg, and she's kind of shook up. You know, she's not communicating very well. What's going on? She said, I just ran into somebody. I turned off all the lights and just ran into somebody in the green room. I said, are the doors all locked? She goes, yeah. Should I call the police? She said, no. I said, what do you mean? You just ran into somebody. You don't want me to call the police? She said, well, it was a ghost. I said, you're kidding. Because it never happened to her before. And I
Wow.
said, well, what's the story? She said, I had the lights off. I walked into the green room and I had to walk around this figure that was in that room. And he was big. He was huge. And I just kept walking. And later on, another woman who was very sensitive was working for us, and she'd gone out. She went back in for some reason because she forgot her lunch or something, or her coffee mug, and she went walking back into that room, and she ran right into him. She's former military, and she said it was like he kind of went on guard, this person, and he um, was linebacker size. So once again, the same description, and we've later communicated with him, and apparently his last orders were to guard the wounded in there, and so that's Hank. That's where we found out his name too, and he's from Louisiana, which goes along with the state from where the troops came from in that area. So Hank goes on guard, and that was probably, we don't know if he even survived the battle because we can't get any more information. We get a little bit of stuff from him, but it's some drips and drabs. So that's our residual ghost there at the in the building that we have, but he's still being seen and
Oh, good
still
old
being
Hank. He's
bumped
still doing
into.
his thing.
Yeah, yeah. Good for him. Good for him.
Yeah. He's standing guard. It's kind of nice because you have like a little protection. Because if you ever
Right.
do have a real life robber, they're gonna see him and be like, you know what? I'm gonna think twice about this.
I would hope so. I would hope so that they would run into
Yeah.
him.
So is there any place in Gettysburg that you will like not go to? Like, is there any place that you're kind of like, I'm not messing with that?
Me personally,
Yeah.
no, not really. I used to, when I was in the park, we used to go on patrol at night, and I
Yeah.
lived in 4 of the houses out on the battlefield. So I slept on the, in the houses on the battlefield that had wounded in them.
Okay.
One of them, actually, I slept. One of the houses I lived in longest was the National Cemetery Lodge,
Oh,
that the
wow.
big brick building right inside the National Cemetery. So
Yeah.
all the, all the soldiers that were, not all the soldiers, but a lot of the soldiers that were killed in the battle were buried out there. But now I will admit that there were times when, if you're out patrolling at night, you're all by yourself and everything, but it's beautiful out there at night on the battlefield.
It is.
And every once in a while, it's like, well, I'm gonna, Devil's Den is really pretty. I'm gonna pull over here, get out, stretch my legs a little bit, walk around. And I did that a few times. Then there are other times I'm driving through Devil's Den and thinking maybe I'll pull over and, stretch my legs. And all of a sudden I get the willies, the chills up the back of my neck. And I'm like, maybe next time around,
Yeah.
I'll just keep going this time, and maybe next time I'll get out. So yeah, I've had that feeling where I've just decided not to do something. But I've had experiences too. I've seen. Now I'm not sensitive. Okay, I'm not a psychic or anything like that. But the I have seen things. I've been tapped on the shoulder. I was doing an investigation at the Cashtown Inn, the famous Cashtown Inn. I was
Oh
tapped
man, the
on my
Cash Town
shoulder.
Inn is active.
That's very active. We were in the basement. Then I was getting EVP, and I got tapped 3 times on my shoulder. And I'm asking all the people, is anybody behind me? Can anybody see? And they're like, no, nobody's behind you. What are you, crazy?
Like,
I was
snap
up
a
at the
picture.
yeah, I was out at the Daniel Lady Farm, and I got my sleeve pulled. Okay. And I saw a figure out on the ridge there that was there standing watching us with red pants on. Okay. And I
Okay.
asked the group that was there, I said, "So your whole group here with you?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're all here." I said, "Okay." And red pants, of course, that was a great big artillery duel out there at the Daniel Lady Farm. And the official color for each branch of the service had an official color. Cavalry was yellow, infantry was light blue, and the artillery was red. So I'm thinking maybe that was an artillerist out there just on the ridge watching what we were doing. So I've seen things, I've heard things,
Yeah.
uh, and been touched. So and
Yeah.
smelled things also. That's another thing that we get in Gettysburg is people will smell uh, uh, lilac water or rose water, which is an old-fashioned perfume,
And
and
peppermint, right?
which we think comes from the fact that the decomposition was out on the battlefield, and the wind would change and blow the smell into town. There's nothing you could do about it except soak your handkerchief in sweet smelling perfume and just hold it up to your face so you can't smell it. They also smell uh, rotten eggs. They'll come in from our tours and they'll say, Yeah, we smell some rotten eggs. Somebody must not taken out their garbage or something. And what they don't realize is that's the smell that is
Like,
given off by black powder,
mhm,
the gunpowder of those days. It has sulfur in it.
mhm.
If you've ever been to a reenactment encampment after after they have their battle, that's all you smell is the
Yeah.
rotten eggs, the sulfur, because it gets in your clothing and you just can't get it out. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
gonna ask if gunpowder was one of the smells because I feel like you would probably smell that so often because it's a whole
yeah,
battlefield.
well, they smell it and they identify it as rotten eggs. Is their first because
Ooh.
that's a sulfurous smell. Uh, but it's from that. It's a remnant, psychic remnant of the battle.
Yeah. Um, it was funny because you had mentioned Devil's Den. My husband, who, like I said, he's more of the history buff, so he has moments, I think, of a little bit of skepticism. And we just happened, I always say it's like the Gettysburg fate. One of my really good friends that I hadn't seen in a long time, he posted a picture of Gettysburg on Snapchat while we were there. And I was like, "Are you in Gettysburg?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "We're actually here ghost hunting." So I was like, okay, well, we definitely have to meet up. So we went, it was probably about dusk. We went to Devil's Den. It started to get a little bit darker, and he had gotten one of the, I want to say, I think it's an EMF reader. And he was asking questions, and he was with my husband, and we kind of broke off. I went with his spouse, and my husband and him went off, and they apparently were asking questions. And my husband said, he was talking about the sharpshooter that they had posed for that famous picture. And he said, did it upset you that they moved your body to pose you for a picture? And the EMF went crazy and stayed there for about 30 seconds with this high pitched like squeal. When I tell you, my husband, I mean, he's in law enforcement. It takes a lot to shake him. He was all I knew is I saw the two of them take off running, like they were on the other side, and I'm like, where are they going? So like we're walking down the other side there. And we finally get back to the car, and they're like, "Yeah, I think we should leave." We're like, "We don't know if we angered something or," and so I'm cracking up because I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I'm like, "Well, what did you ask?" And so he told me, and I'm like, "Well, he definitely felt some type of way about it." I'm like, because that's one hell of an answer. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of times oh, that's good though. I mean, because what happened is that he got a reaction to a specific question, and of course that William Frazanito, the photographer, photographic historian of Gettysburg, who's a friend of mine, discovered that that body in the first picture was the same as the body in the second picture, and was moved, which is kind of a horrible thing that they did to him, because I can picture these photographers seeing that body and taking a picture of it in the first position and walking over and seeing the barricade there and then saying, "Boy, it's too bad we don't have a body behind that barricade." And then the evil light bulb goes on, and they go over and drag this poor kid over there and pose him. And so that's disturbing to anybody, and no doubt to him as well. But
yeah.
that's the first time I've heard that an EMF meter was used and to get a reaction there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's the ones that they sell at Gettysburg, because I've seen them before. They kind of have an orange top, but the way that my friend used it was he would ask something, and if it would go, he would say, if it's a yes, turn it green. If it's a no,
Yes.
it goes to red. And there was like a different sound pitch. One was lower, but they both and this my friend does this, like his whole family is very into the supernatural, and so he's very experienced in it. My husband, however, is not. So he
Oh,
said,
okay.
Yeah, so my husband, like I said, he's all history. So whereas my other friend, like I said, he's more supernatural. So he was kind of having my husband, he was like, you know more about the history side of things. He's like, you would be a good person to ask questions because you'll know the answers to them and whether or not this thing's kind of telling the truth. And so my husband said the one thing I've always wondered, because it was so horrible, was when they moved this body, people have reported seeing this spirit. There's been many stories about feeling uneasy in the spot that he was initially posed. So yeah, so he was like, I just wanted to ask that. He's like, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but he said the response, not only from the EMF, but the way that just the energy changed. And he said, whatever it was, he was like, I feel like I pissed it off, or I don't know what I did. He's like, but I hightailed it out of there with your friend. And it's true, because we just saw them, like, you know how it goes around two sides. We were on the other side and I saw their two figures just book it. And I was like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah. Well,
So,
that's also interesting. I mean, first of all, he's a historian and law enforcement.
yep.
Hey, but when you run into something like that, that's scary. That's scary,
Yeah. Yeah. So
especially the
he's
first
a,
time.
oh yeah, he is he loves Gettysburg. It's funny because I always joke with him. I'm like, I took him one time. It was when we were started just early dating, and he had mentioned it. And I said, you know what? Instead of like a birthday gift or like a Christmas gift, I'm gonna do an experience. So I took him to Gettysburg. I don't know what I did myself in. I'm like, because
Yeah.
Taylor can attest. I think we go,
Oh my
oh
God.
gosh. Yeah.
And now that you guys have a kid, he loves to take her like all the time.
All the time. So, and that's what we did during COVID, because you couldn't really go in anywhere, and
Right.
Gettysburg was the perfect place. So that's where I spent most of my maternity leave.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. It's all open fields and everything out
Yeah.
there. You don't have to go anywhere. You can get a quick meal somewhere. But
Yeah.
it's a beautiful, it really is a beautiful place, and it's sad that it's associated with such a terrible tragedy, like
Yeah.
a battle that cost 51,000 casualties. That's killed, wounded, and missing all those people who either died or suffered because of what happened to them there in those 3 days.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I kind of wanted to touch upon. So there is a lot of speculation about the orphanage. There's many things that are talked about. And so I like to kind of take things with a grain of salt until, I talk to somebody who's more experienced or maybe has, worked with that particular location. So have you ever experienced the orphanage, and is there truth to it? Is there fallacy? What's kind of going on over there?
Oh, well, yeah, I had two lengthy experiences there. One, when I was right out of the Park Service, I did a it had a bunch of artifacts in it. It was a Soldiers National Museum, and they had never been cataloged. So I cataloged them for the owner. I cataloged those artifacts, the artifacts and also the artifacts in the Jenny Wade House for
Oh,
the owner of those buildings. And so I spent hours and hours and hours alone in that building, opening up the cases, marking all the artifacts and so forth. And and then later on, I did an investigation there and got some EVP. There was a Canadian television program that had a young man, 13, 14 years old. They wanted him to be an investigator in the orphanage because they had many young children there too. They thought that might be a good connection. So I took him on an investigation of that building and let him try and get some EVP. I had a list of the names of the orphans that were there, and he started talking to them, asking their names and everything, and was getting some positive responses to the kids answering to their names and things like that. So I'm pretty familiar with that. At least at a couple times that I've been there. Apparently, it's gotten a little more active, mainly I think because there's more activity in there, more human activity, living human activity, which um, may, for one reason or another, either because it's the energy that's brought there by the living humans, or they uh, somehow provoke the ghosts into, you know, being a little more active. So that I think helps a little bit, but it's a fairly active place, and people can, I guess, rent it out if you have a group and go in there and do investigations.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you said you talked a little bit about EVPs. So do you have any EVPs that we could show the listeners?
I have probably about 8 or 9,000 EVPs. Are you ready to? No,
Oh my
I'm
God.
kidding. I have
We're
a
just
couple.
we're gonna unload the
Actually
filing
believe you for a
cabinet.
I've always wanted to do a book, not on all the EVPs I have, but the best ones. And I could never figure out. Carol, my wife, is my publisher and my editor. She says we can't do this because it's impossible in print. Now you have that was 10 years ago. Now you have the opportunity to put it out as like an ebook,
Yeah,
and
I
all
was
you
gonna
have to
say, give
do,
me all the audiobooks.
yeah, all you have to read it and click on it. Okay,
Yes.
and then it takes you to the uh, EVP, and you can listen to it. But I have a couple that I brought up. One came from, if you'd like to hear it, one came from the basement of the Cashtown Inn, and
Oh,
I was down there with Patty Wilson, who is a co-author on a couple of my books, and is a fabulous sensitive. And since I'm not sensitive, I have to rely on her. And I'd ask her, okay, who am I going to try and talk to
yeah.
tonight? And she said, I think there's a young Confederate soldier here that he'd like to talk to you. And I said, well, what's his name? And she said, Andrew is his name. And I said, okay, well, I'll see if I can ask him a question. So I'll play this for you, and you'll hear an answer. And I hate to tell you what it is, but I will, because sometimes it's a little difficult. But I'll play it at least twice, and you can try and figure it out. So here you go.
Yeah.
That's wait a minute. Let's start over because the volume was way down.
I'm excited.
Me too.
I don't think you can hear it. I don't know why it's so quiet.
Is your mic like by do you know where your mic is? Do you have like a separate mic, or do you
It's
have
supposed to be on my ear. Let me try and play it up here.
Oh no, that's lower.
That's lower.
I think if you
That's right. One more time. If not, what I can do is I can send this to you.
yeah, and
Okay.
I'll edit it in.
It's hard enough
Ooh,
to
it
figure
was
out.
definitely louder when you put it up to your
Okay.
ear. So I'm trying to figure out what it said though, because I heard it.
Yeah.
It's 4 syllables. It's a Confederate state, a Southern state. Okay. So I'll play it
Okay.
one more time.
Mississippi?
Yes, very good. Yeah,
I thought I heard it say Mississippi.
that's
That's what
exactly
it
what it
sounded
said.
like.
Yeah.
Did you hear it,
So
Tay?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
like
So
I heard it. I was listening to the wrong sound at first, but then when
yeah,
I tuned in, it was a very low. It was like Mississippi.
yeah,
That was
it's a little quiet on this one, but now this one's a little bit louder. It was done. I did not do this, but someone from Patty's group did this out at Iverson's pits. Now,
oh
Iverson's,
man.
yeah,
I've had some stuff happen in Iverson's pits.
that's actually one of the first ghost post battle ghost stories was ever recorded, and it happened in the probably 72 or 73. because there were Confederate soldiers buried out there until the 1870s. They remained on the battlefield 8 years after the battle. And when they exhumed the bodies, they left a big trench, and it was called Iverson's Pits, named after the commander of the troops out there. Those men were shot down, probably several hundred of them, within a tenth of a second. They all died
They
together.
said it was like, my husband was telling me it was like one of the bloodiest parts, right, of the battlefield. Well,
It definitely was, and
gory,
was,
I guess he said he used a word. He was like gory or
yeah, the men didn't stand a chance. They were out in an open field and took a tremendous fire on the flank. They said when they went out to bury the bodies, they were lined up. Their feet were lined up.
Mm-hmm.
They were dead. And then when they exhumed the bodies, they left that big trench. And Farmer Forney, who is a fellow who owned that land, could not get his workers to work out there. They refused to work those fields. And he asked them why. What's the matter? And they said, we're hearing things out there. Broad daylight, they're hearing orders being shouted from nowhere, out of nowhere. Guns going off, bugles, screams. That was the worst part. They said we heard screams of people as they're dying. So Patty Wilson and her group went out there, and one woman, it was getting dark and they had to leave, and they said, come on, let's go. She says, I just have to say something to these poor guys. And so you'll hear her saying, God be with you. And she left her recorder going, and you'll hear right after that something kind of actually horrifying. Did you hear that?
Might need it one more time.
All right.
Oh, I hear something, but I
I
can't
heard
make that
something
out.
too. I couldn't make it out, but I did hear
It's-
something.
It's a scream.
And that's what I thought. It sounded like a shriek or like it's like,
Yeah.
and I was
Yep,
like,
that's it.
Ooh.
Play it one more time now that you've identified
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Ooh.
Phase out there, but yeah, that was that's kind of scary when you know what happened out there historically.
Yeah.
When that matches up with the reports of Farmer Forney's workers.
Well, and you know, it's funny that you got an EVP there. So one of our major events, and our whole family knows about this because we left the Gettysburg Hotel at about, I want to say it was about midnight. And we drove 2 hours to my mother-in-law in Stroudsburg because we had such a profound experience. And it was EVP. It started out EVP based. We were at Iverson's Pits. I was really tired. I get very tired when I go to Gettysburg. So I took a nap in the car. My phone was dead, completely dead. My husband's like, I'm going to go out and like walk Iverson's Pits while you nap. I'm like, okay. So he's out in the field. He's walking around. He's reading his book, kind of place and everything where people were. Probably about like, I want to say a half hour later, I woke up, took my photography camera, went to the top of the tower that's there. And was taking pictures and whatnot. And my husband said, you know, when he came back to the car and I wasn't there, he was like, oh, I tried calling you. And I'm like, oh, my phone's dead. He's like, well, it rang, but then it picked up and then it went beep, 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 and then hung up. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So long story short, we went back to the hotel. I plugged my phone in, left it to charge. We went out, had some dinner, you know, bar hopped a little bit. And we left Sweeney's Tavern it was probably about 11:30, 11:45, went back to the hotel. When we walked back in the room, he basically, like, my phone charged up and he had left his phone as well. So he picks his phone up and it said voicemail, like from my contact. And I was like, well, I didn't have my phone this entire time and it was dead before. And kid you not, he listens to the voicemail on speakerphone and we both just like froze because it's a woman just maniacally laughing. And so I'll have to send that to you, but we
I'd
were
love to
like,
hear it, yeah.
okay, it was very strange. And then we were like, all right, very creepy, but like, we should probably like get to bed. I'm like, I kind of just wanted to ignore it. He's like, let me just listen to it one more time. So he plays it and he's like, yeah, he's like, that's creeping me out. So then he puts the phone down and we hear the same laugh inside the living room.
Ah.
And we were like, that was not from the phone. And then it happened again, but this time it was inside like the room with us. And so I was like, nope, that's good enough for me. There was something about it that just it takes a lot to scare me because I am sensitive. So I've seen a lot of things, I've experienced a lot of things. I don't necessarily know what it was or what it was trying to accomplish, but it didn't feel very good. I'm not saying the D word by any means because I don't think that's what it was, but it just was very maniacal, very mischievous. So I just grabbed what I could. I was like, I'm pretty sure I left something behind. And we just packed up, we turned in our keys and we just left. So,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was at the pits.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the Gettysburg Hotel, we've done investigations there. And there is a woman there. And Carol would have to fill in what I think it's the third floor, but I'm not sure.
That's where we were.
Okay.
The third floor.
Okay. And she was a nurse. She was a nurse when that was a hospital. The building there that was there at the time was a hospital. Didn't look anything like it does now. And she was kind of mischievous. In other words, she wasn't really square with us when she changed her name a couple of times when we asked her who she was. And according to at least one of our mediums, she actually changed her physical, did a little shape shifting. Okay. So we're not sure exactly. And I can't even remember her name, but she was one of those unusual characters that you run into that, we do retain apparently some of our personality after we die. Okay.
Yeah.
Some of us are jokesters. I think a lot of the ghosts that we run into are just kind of doing stuff to mess with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Hiding stuff from you, moving your keys or moving, something that you put down somewhere. And so I think that happens. And then you have others that kind of maybe want to scare you a little bit, which may be what you ran into at the Gettysburg Hotel. That's too bad. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, when I tell you, I mean, like I said, it does take a lot to scare me. And Taylor can attest. I mean, we went to that haunted objects museum and there's some evil stuff in there. And for me, like, I'm not scared by it. I'm more on like protection mode and just kind of keeping everybody safe. But what I couldn't figure out for the life of me, like I'm very good at depicting, okay, like is this a spirit? Is this something a little bit darker? Is it human? Is it not human? Usually a lot of the times I can pull it from them and I know kind of what's there. But whatever this was, like I couldn't, and that would make sense, the whole shape shifting thing, because I could not put my finger on it. Like I was like, I don't know what this is, but it made me feel very uneasy and very just odd. Like I don't really know a word for it. So I was like, I just looked at my husband and it was kind of like he was looking at me like, all right, if she's feeling odd, we're packing up and we're going. So we did end up leaving, but we had more experiences prior to that major point. But yeah, I was like, I don't want to chew your ear off on that situation, but I just thought it was funny that that's where you had gotten the EVP from, because that's where we captured that voicemail. And what's even funnier was the voicemail vanished off my husband's phone, but I recorded it as a voice memo. So we have it somewhere. So I'll have to send it to you, but it is Yeah.
I had the same thing, a laughter type of a thing. We were doing an investigation down in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is
Oh,
another huge battlefield
yeah.
down there. And in the Rising Sun Tavern, and I heard some weird laughter down
Oh,
there in the basement. I thought maybe they were fooling with us because I saw some speakers up there. Apparently they used it for something else. When I asked the manager, I said, very funny, kind of scare us with that B-roll film laughter. He said, what are you talking about? I said, didn't you? No, nobody knows what's going on. The speakers don't work anymore. Like, oh, we got back to the uh, hotel, a brand new Marriott that we were staying at. And we were kind of summing up in this large room our our day. And all of a sudden we heard the same laughter
that's so weird.
6 blocks away in a brand new place. And it was out in the hall. And I looked out, out the one door, and my friend went out the other door, and there's nobody out in the hall. So yeah, that kind of stuff is a little unnerving.
Yeah, but I find it even weirder that you had a very similar experience, where because I said to my husband, the weirdest thing is we were trying to make sense of it. We're like, how did it just go from the voicemail to the living room of the suite we were in to like it was so loud that it literally sounded like somebody was like sitting in between me and my husband. So
Yeah.
that's very strange how that happens.
Yeah.
Um
And that goes from EVP, which is the electronic voice phenomenon, which was caught on your phones, to actually hearing it. That's
yeah,
not electronic. That's
no.
audible because the air is being moved and hitting against your eardrum. That's out of the realm. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah, and
something different.
that's why we were trying to make sense of it, because when it first happened, it was kind of one of those, when we heard it out in the living room of the suite, it was like I heard it, but then I was like, okay, I'm gonna pretend like I didn't just hear that. Looked up at my husband. I was hoping he wasn't gonna acknowledge it. And then he looks at me, goes, did you just hear that? And I'm like, I'm like, all right, now we gotta talk about the elephant in the room. And
If you
before
heard
we
it,
can
you
even
didn't.
talk, yeah.
You didn't hear it. If you thought you heard it, you didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it. No, but I was like, before I could even acknowledge, the fact that there was an elephant in the room, the elephant was sitting in between me and my husband.
Right. But and also the interesting thing is, if you heard it, you're sensitive. Okay. The fact that he heard it too is even more remarkable. So, because that means it actually happened in the room. It was actual noise.
That's kind of why I
So,
was hoping that I could just skate past it, because I was like, maybe this is just a me thing and I can move past it. But then when I saw his face and he was looking at me, I knew it was going to come out of his mouth. And then all of a sudden he goes, did you hear that? I'm like, no. So another thing that I wanted to touch upon was Sachs Bridge. That's another a hot spot. So have you investigated there? Do you have any fun stories about that?
many, many times. Actually, I was involved in the organization, the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Organization. I forget what year it was, in the 70s. I think Agnes came through, washed that bridge off its moorings, and washed it down Marsh Creek quite a ways, maybe
Wow.
100 yards or so. And so we were involved in bringing it back. And can you imagine moving that bridge,
That's a big
setting it up?
bridge.
Yeah, it was. We set it back on its moorings and reinforced it, so it shouldn't happen again. Probably 80% of the bridge is original
Okay.
still to this day, the
Okay.
wood and everything. It both Union and Confederates crossed that bridge, used it during the battle. The Confederates ended up in possession of the bridge during the battle. It became, that whole area around there became a hospital. And and of course, so there were burials out there, and many of those are still there. They haven't gotten all the bodies and remains now, and those would be probably still there, which is why there's once again more activity than ever since people have realized that it is haunted, and so people go out there and maybe stir things up a little bit.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that happened to me, we went out there with Carol Fitzpatrick and a radio station that after my books came out, they wanted to do something on Halloween out of
Ooh.
Sachs Bridge. And so we were out there before dawn. And I was at the one end, the far end of the bridge, and with a digital camera, and another investigator next to me had a night vision scope. And I just said, I'm in my head, I said, just take a picture. So I threw the camera up and took a picture, and I could see in a little viewfinder that something was there. And I said, hey, I think I just, and she interrupted me. She said, I just saw something go by. And
Oh,
I showed her the picture. She said, that's what I saw. So she saw it in a night vision scope, and I've got a picture of it. And it's a classic. It's one of the it looks like what you imagine a ghost should look like. Is kind of on the side and kind of zooming by,
that's pretty cool.
ectoplasm and that kind of stuff. And then one time we had Carol out there, Carol Kirkpatrick, and we were walking through the bridge, and she was getting impressions. And of course, the far end of the bridge from where you park is uh, was hospital scene or hospitals out there. And we got about 3/4 across the bridge. I said, and I told her that. I said, you want to go to that other side? She says, nope. I said, Carol, I've never heard you say no to going and doing an investigation. She says, I don't have the energy for that place right now.
Wow.
So it's stumped maybe one of the best American psychics that we've had. And she said, no, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
So it's active. And my theory is that it's because there's so much water. That's the largest body of water, basically running water in Gettysburg.
It makes
And
sense.
there's so much energy in water. And if it's true that ghosts need to borrow or steal energy, water is a good place.
Yeah.
I know that's why Fredericksburg is has so many visuals. That's my theory. In Gettysburg, if you look at all my stories, only about 10% of the stories are visuals. You know, auditory 60%, 62%. People hear things, but visuals only 10, 11%. Fredericksburg, the stories I collected, 25 to 28% are visuals, a lot more
Wow.
visuals. And that's
Yeah.
because the Rappahannock River, which is huge, and all the energy that river is moving, the water energy that's moving by, may help feed the the spirits, helps give them more energy that they can use. So, but it's just a theory of mine.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes total sense. It
If
does.
ghosts need energy,
It's
great
a good
place to
place
get
to
it.
pull it.
Yeah.
And water is also usually always associated, especially in a place where there's been a lot of death and everything, with hauntings. So
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor, kind of before we wrap up, is there anything I missed? Is there any questions that you
There
wanted to
was
kind of?
only one question. I was so curious the whole time. I wanted to know what your take or like your experience was involving the witness trees. Because I feel like when we went on that trip, the biggest thing that I felt like that connected me the most, like when we were touching and putting our hands on some of the witness trees, I felt like a lot of energy in them. And I wanted to know like what your take was on the witness trees. Because I know they're like a big deal there.
yeah, well, as a historian, I think they're fascinating. The fact that the trees, but they've been through a lot. I mean, there are a lot on the battlefield, but you have to remember that battlefield. We have a tendency to think it's just frozen in time for those 3 days. But for example, in 1918, the World War I camp was right there in the middle of Pickett's Charge.
Mhm.
and it was commanded by Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was a colonel, I guess, back then, and he commanded that before he became famous. And they used to drive around and fire bullets at the trees that were there. And a lot of the trees, they practically have machine gun practice out there. So a lot of the trees got hit with those pieces of metal too. So I don't know how much. I think it depends on the individual if you're affected by that living thing that is a tree, and I know that they were affected by some of the energies out there at the upper corner of the triangular field. There are several trees, and some of our mediums have said there's something going on in that corner. We don't know what it is, but if you walk over to the corner of the triangular field and you look up at the trees, they are kind of bent away, and there are no limbs growing on the inside of that. So
Oh,
I
I
don't
didn't know
know what's
that.
going on. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but there's something weird going on right in the middle of those trees. So at any rate, yeah, the witness trees are cool, but so are the witness houses
Yeah.
and buildings and everything. So, and I have a theory about that too, which goes too deep for what we're doing now. But
well, that's okay, because maybe it'll just give us another chance to do a part 2 and have you on, sometime in the near future. Because I think we're gonna have to take Taylor for her part 2 back to Gettysburg. And
I've been wanting to go back. I've literally been talking to my boyfriend for the last few months. I'm like, I gotta take you on a trip to Gettysburg, because like the time that my cousins took me, it was so cool. Like, and I'm not a huge history buff, but like my cousin, her husband, made it like actually interesting. Like I'm not huge into history, and like it was really cool learning about the history of it and the spooky part of it. It's
Yeah.
awesome. I'd go back anytime.
yeah, it's a great combination, and a reason for the haunting.
Yeah.
The hauntings would be the battle, of course.
Yeah. So here you have it, guys. One of the things that I will highly suggest, again, Mark Nesbitt is an author. He has written many, many great ghost books. The main one, the first one, the OG, being The Ghosts of Gettysburg. So if you want to look them up, if you take a trip to Gettysburg, make sure you pick up some awesome literature. Give it a read, check out some of the spots that we talked about today. And thank you so much again, Mark, for being on and giving us a little insight, and also validating that, we had a similar experience there with our little EVP voice phenomenon. So I have a little ritual that I say when I wrap up every podcast interview. I usually say, until next time, let's get weird. So if you don't mind, I know it's goofy, it's funny, but it makes everybody laugh. And so I love to close it out like that. So if you don't mind joining us, I'm going to say, until next time. You guys ready?
Yep.
Let's get weird.
Get weird.
Oh, I missed it.
Oh, we're almost
That's right. All right, go ahead.
That's-
Give us your best. Let's get weird, Mark.
Okay, let's get weird.
Yes.
Nice.
Thanks so much, Mark. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Morgan.
Bye.
Bye-bye.